Chapter 14. Death. Trnt decided to leave as soon as he could in order to recover all the Greek Empire and put it in the emperor's power. At the same time, it hurt him to think of being away from the princess, for life without her was impossible. He was tired of war now, and he wanted peace and tranquility. When he received news that the magnanimous King Escriano was coming with many men, and that he was in Pinix, which borders on Greece, and is 10 days' journey from Constantinople, he decided to go out to meet him. After he had taken his leave of the emperor, the empress, and of his princess and wife, he left the city of Constantinople and went to his camp with grandees and other nobles. When the Caesar reached his camp, he had the trumpets blow for the camp to be raised. Everyone got ready, and the following morning they left the bridge and went towards the place where King Escriano was. As the powerful army was going along, many castles and villas delivered themselves over to the Caesar. We omit their names to avoid being prolix. Finally, they reached the city of Trnt, where King Escriano's army was resting. When King Escriano knew that his dear friend and brother at arms was coming, he rode out with his grandees and met him on the road. They dismounted quickly, embraced, and kissed very warmly. Trnt told King Escriano that the King of Sicily and the King of Fez were with him. King Escriano went to the other kings and embraced and kissed them very courteously. Then they mounted their horses again and went towards the city. When they reached King Escriano's tents, King Trnt, Prince Trnt, and the kings dismounted in front of the tents of the illustrious Queen of Ethiopia, who welcomed them and embraced and kissed them all. They decided to send the beautiful queen to the city of Constantinople and 500 soldiers to made ready to go, accompanied by many nobles and knights. The illustrious queen took leave of her lord, King Escriano, Trnt, and the other kings and lords who escorted her for a league. Then Trnt and the others bade the queen farewell, and she continued on to Constantinople, while Trnt and the others returned to the city. Trnt and King Escriano immediately commanded their camps to be raised, and each of them to put their men in order. They left the city and went towards the province of Thrace. They reached a city called Astagria, which was surrounded by walls adorned with beautiful towers. The city immediately opened all the gates to them. After all the renegade Greeks had been made good Christians again, they swore fidelity to the emperor, and all the Moors who did not want to be baptized were thrown out of the city. It was in this same city that the great philosopher Aristotle had been born, and he was considered a saint. While Prince Trnt had his tent set up in this city and was resting, he sent 2 Moorish ambassadors through the outlying territories and to all the cities, castles, and villas of the neighboring provinces. They delivered up their keys and rendered homage to Prince Trnt, and he replaced the captain of every city, villa, and castle. They then left the city of Stagria and headed for Macedonia, stopping at a city called Olympus. This city takes its name from a nearby mountain, one of the highest in the world. Here they were better received than in any of the other places they had been, because they knew that Caesar was the cousin of Deiphobus, their duke and lord. The prince left the duchy of Macedonia, and they went to the city of Trebizond, where they delivered itself over immediately. They brought all the knights who were held prisoner here, and with them was Captain Deiphobus, Duke of Macedonia. Prince Trnt asked for the Duke of Macedonia, and he was brought to him, but he was so changed that Trnt would never have recognized him. His beard had grown down to his waist, and the hair on his head reached past his shoulders, and he was thin and discolored, and his appearance very different. He wore a yellow cloak with a blue turban around his head, and the other knights were dressed the same way. When the Duke of Macedonia was before Caesar, he threw himself at his feet, wanting to kiss them. The Caesar lifted him up, and with tears running from his eyes, he kissed him on the mouth. Soon the Marquis of St. George presented himself before Trnt, and kneeling, he thanked him for freeing them. Prince Trnt, with great affection, lifted him from the ground and kissed him on the mouth. After the Marquis came the Duke of Pera, his brother, and the Prior of St. John, and all the other knights. The Caesar received them with great love, and honored them as they deserved. After the illustrious Queen of Ethiopia left the city of Trnt, she journeyed quickly to the renowned city of Constantinople. When the Queen stood before the princess, she began to kneel, but the princess caught her by the arm, raised her up, and kissed her warmly 3 times. Then she took her hand and made her sit at her side. The princess was astonished at the Queen's great beauty. At the same time, the Queen of Ethiopia was startled by the beauty of the princess. Everyone in the court was impressed by the Queen's beauty, and they whispered about Trnt's great virtue in turning down such a beautiful lady, for they were sure she had asked him to be her husband and lord of the kingdom of Tunis and of all Barbary, and he had left it all for the love of the princess. After the Caesar had held celebrations for the Duke of Macedonia and his companions, he gave them their leave. They left the city of Trebizond and went to the illustrious city of Constantinople. There they were welcomed with honor by His Majesty the Emperor, and by the Empress and all the ladies. And the Duke of Macedonia was especially welcomed by the Duchess, his wife, who loved him more than her life. With the arrival of the prisoners, great celebrations were held in the court. After the Duke of Macedonia had left the city of Trebizond with all his companions, Trnt quickly had the others break camp, and he had King Escriano and all his men, and each captain with his squadron depart. So one squadron left after another, in orderly fashion, and they went to the land of Benin, 6 days' journey away. And when the Caesar arrived there with his entire army, they surrendered to him by order of the Sultan and the Turk. When the captains had been placed in the city and in the fortress, they advanced and recovered the entire province of Balgae, and all the lands of Bryn, and all the lands of Foxa, and all the lands of Bokchina. For each of these was a large province with many cities, castles, and villas, and they all surrendered willingly to the Caesar. They were accustomed to being subject to the Greek Empire, and they wanted to be so again because of the bad treatment they received from the Moors. The Caesar left these provinces and recovered many other cities. From here he went to the kingdom of Persia, and he took it by force of arms, for it did not belong to the Sultan or the Turk, and had its own king. The virtuous Prince Trnt conquered many other provinces and lands, and joined them under the dominion and power of the empire with such great triumph and victory that it would be tiring to tell it all. He recovered all Greece, Asia Minor, all the Persia, all Salonich, which is Gallipoli, Mora, Archaea, and the Cape of Archaea, Valona, and by sea he sent the fleet which he had in Constantinople to take the islands with his admiral, the Marquis of Lausanne, as its captain. And he took all the islands which had belonged to the empire, Calestris, Kolkos, Ortigi, Tabrisk, Nemochka, Flaxen, Meltokbask, and many other islands the book does not mention to avoid prolixity. After the admiral had conquered all the islands that had once formed part of the empire, he had his entire fleet return to Constantinople, and they entered the city, firing the bombards and shouting their greetings to the illustrious city. The townspeople ran to the seawall to greet the fleet with joy. The admiral disembarked, accompanied by many well-dressed knights and noblemen, and they went to bow to His Majesty the Emperor, who received them very cordially, and they all kissed his foot and his hand. Wanting to reward many nobles and knights who had been released from their imprisonment, he gave them over in matrimony to the maidens of the high station, all of them servants of the empress and the princess, and he also gave them large estates so they could live out their lives honorably. When the engagements had been made, their weddings were postponed until the day Prince Trnt could be wed to the princess. But fortune would not permit a mortal body to have so much delight and glory in this world. For God did not create human nature to reach bliss and glory in this world, but instead to enjoy the glory of paradise. No one ponders this. Every day virtuous men perform illustrious acts worthy of immortal memory, as did this magnanimous and virtuous prince and valiant knight Trnt Leblanc. For with his great skill at arms and high degree of intelligence, He conquered so many kingdoms and brought unaccountable numbers of people in Barbary and in Greece into the Holy Catholic faith. Yet he was unable to see the finality of all that he had so desired and labored for. Among so many other sorrows, I find it impossible to free my weary hands from setting down on white paper how fortune lets man go unrewarded. This despite the fact that the glorious actions of Trnt bring me renewed anguish, for they did not bring him the prize he so richly deserved. So then, after the Caesar had defeated and recovered the entire empire, and subjugated many other nearby provinces, he started back in great triumph to the city Constantinople. In his company went the magnanimous king of Fez, and many other kings, dukes, counts, and marquises, and innumerable knights, who came with him to share in the enormous celebrations that would take place upon his return, and out of love for King Escriano, and to celebrate Trnt's wedding. And no one would leave his side. When the emperor received word he was coming, he prepared an enormous celebration. When Trnt was one day's journey from Constantinople, in a city called Andropol, he stopped because the emperor had sent word to him not to come to the city until he should tell him. While the virtuous Caesar was enjoying himself in that city, finding sport and pleasure, and strolling with the King Escriano and the King of Sicily at a river's edge which ran alongside the walls of the city, he felt such a great and powerful pain in his side that they had to take him in their arms and carry him back into the city. When Trnt was in his bed, the 6 doctors who accompanied him came to him, the best in the world, and 4 of King Escriano's. They gave him many kinds of medicine, but these brought no relief to his pain. Then Trnt realized he was dying, and he asked for confession. They had the confessor who accompanied him come quickly. He was a good priest of the order of St. Francis, a teacher of the holy theology, and a man of great knowledge. While the Caesar was making confession, the king of Fez sent an urgent message to the emperor, giving his majesty to know that the Caesar was very ill, and that his doctors could not help him. He begged his grace to send his own doctors very quickly, as he had great doubts that they would arrive in time.